He was a police officer in one of America's most violent cities. We're going to talk about the murder of a police officer that we both had connections to, his career, and much more. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Today radio show. I'm your host. My name's John J. Wiley. In addition to being a radio broadcaster, I'm a retired police sergeant. For the latest news articles and much more, check out our website, letradioshow.com. In the Law Enforcement Today show, we'll be joined by special guests. We'll be talking about their experiences and issues affecting law enforcement officers, first responders, their families, their community, and victims of horrendous crimes. Be sure to like us on Facebook. Our page is Law Enforcement Today Radio Show. Check out the daily articles on our website, letradioshow.com. And while you're there, download our free app. We are thrilled to partner with Shatterproof at FHE, the world-renowned treatment program for first responders, because at times, helpers need help. Exclusive treatment services for first responders who may suffer from exposure to trauma, PTSD, anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. For free 24/7 information, call 833-776-1420. 833-776-1420. That's 833-776-1420, or online at fhehealth.com. That's fhehealth.com. Under programs, you'll find details about Shatterproof. Calling us from the Baltimore area, we have retired Baltimore Police Detective Gary McLhinney, also retired Chief Police of Maryland Transportation Authority, co-author of the book Bleeding Blue, 4 Decades Policing the Violent City of Baltimore, with co-author Kevin Coward. Gary, thanks so much for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Today show. Very much appreciated.
Thanks for the opportunity.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Number one, I got to say this. Gary and I, our careers overlapped. We both worked in the Baltimore Police Department. I believe you were an East Side cop and I was West Side, so we really didn't know each other.
Right. In Baltimore City, there's a clear dividing line, not only when it comes to crime and perpetrators, but kind of cop's career path, if you will. You either start on the East Side, you end on the East Side. You start on the West Side, you end on the West Side. But yeah, I spent my career on the street in the Northeast District. And
what years were you there?
I joined as a cadet, as a 19-year-old in 1980, and was assigned to planning and research, doing cadet stuff, which is, filing papers mostly. And then my first assignment was the Northeast District.
And what a lot of people don't realize is cadets, they do a lot of clerical work, and then they go in the academy just like everybody else, got to go through the whole process just like everyone else. And it's a way of extending your career. You can start earlier. But from 19 to 21, you weren't policing. You were a clerk.
Exactly. I went into the academy just before I turned 21, which as long as you turned 21 while you were in the academy, you were good to go. But I learned a lot about the department working in headquarters. I actually worked on the 8th floor of our old headquarters building, which you'll know was where the police commissioner and the command staff was.
Mm-hmm.
So
you hated getting called there. If you got called by a dispatcher, report to 8th floor of the headquarters building, it was never good.
No, you probably went with your badge in your hand and your gun unloaded.
Fortunately, I never got that call. I got the call to IA many times, Internal Affairs, but I never got the call to go to the 8th floor. It never happened.
Yeah. And, I always tell a funny story. As cadets, we weren't allowed to use the elevators. We had to walk the steps.
Right.
And if you ever tried to sneak on the elevator, invariably you'd run into our old police commissioner, Donald Pomelo,
yep,
or one of the command staff members who would give you a sideways look, and you hit the next button and got off.
When we were in the academy, if my memory serves correct, it was a long time ago. I went in 1980. When I was in the academy, we had to take the stairs. We weren't allowed to take the elevator. And when you did take the elevator, you know what would happen. This is for the benefit of people who don't know. There was a character, and when I say character, we had so many great characters in Baltimore Police Department, named Jules Neviker. Jules was famous for pranking people, and his ID photo that you had to wear inside the building would oftentimes have photos of someone else. And I got in the elevator one time, and he had a photo. Since graduate academy, he had a photo of the commissioner on, and guess who was standing next to him? This guy was
It had
priceless.
to be the commissioner.
It was.
Yeah.
He was priceless. So, there's a lot of levity. Those are things that I miss. You know what I don't miss, Gary, is, and people ask me all the time, and I don't normally entertain the question, how violent is Baltimore? And they act like it's a recent thing. In the 1980s, it was no joke. As a matter of fact, it might even be more violent than it is today.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, when you look back at the 80s, and even earlier, when you look back at history of our department, police officers murdered sitting in their cars by members of the Black Panther Party. That occurred in Baltimore on Greenmount Avenue. And the murders were well over 300 in the 80s, which is kind of the artificial benchmark, if you will, that people tag on Baltimore when it comes to whether it's violent or not. But I think the difference now is Baltimore City's population might be, 40, 50% of what it was back then. So sheer per capita numbers is what people focus on. But Baltimore has always been a major city when it comes to violence. And, we led the country in heroin. Baltimore was the heroin capital of the East Coast for much of the late 60s, 70s, going into the 80s, and then, of course, took off when crack cocaine became the drug of choice on our streets.
Many changes. Well, I think when I started in Baltimore, there's about 880,000 people. In the 60s or 70s, there was 1 million plus in Baltimore City.
Yep.
And now, last time I checked, I think there's about 660,000. And they're like 500 police short. So one of the things that people really need to understand, and I'm just using numbers from Wikipedia, and I'm going from the top of my head because I don't have it in front of me. From 1980 to last year, 2021, 11,500 plus people were murdered in Baltimore. 11,000. And people act like that's just an everyday occurrence. They don't get up in arms. Can you imagine? We didn't have that many people killed, I believe, in the Afghanistan war in 20 years.
Correct. Or in our total war on terror.
It is mind-boggling. And so, again, how violent is Baltimore? That's a question I don't like to answer. That's a question I don't entertain very often. I'm sure you got this, too. I was involved in 4 shootings in a little more than 10 years. The first 2 I never fired back. They were never like they're portrayed in the media. The news media in particular portrays them as a certain way that we're all trigger happy. That's not the case. But shootings, and while they were everyday occurrence in Northwest District of Baltimore and Western, murders weren't. Murders were quite frequent, but shootings were daily.
Yeah, Baltimore, in terms of how violent it is right now, is extremely violent because, the majority of the homicides in Baltimore used to be attributed to the Western or the Eastern District, 2 very small districts within the police department's 9-district structure. But now it's spread. Now, Northeast, 2 years ago, Northeast had one of the largest increases in homicides and shootings. And as you know, we used to call Northeast a country club, right? It had 2 golf courses in the district.
And that's where you went to retire. That's where cops went to retire.
Right.
Like,
you took your...
Nothing bad happened
you took
there.
Your putter. Right. You had your putter in the back of the trunk, for those slow nights. But that's not the case now. And we've seen a lot of what you and I would call innocence. Yeah. Right. So robbery's gone bad. People shot on the street. People shot in the Baltimore Inner Harbor. Homicides occurring at the harbor, the crown jewel of Baltimore, which used to be protected with everything they had. We've had a couple of those recently.
And it's never
it's literally out of control.
We've got crime with squeegee kids. We've got crime. And people just... And I hate to say this negatively, and it sounds negative when I say it. For many, many years, Baltimore had a huge drug problem, and no one seemed to care until it entered the suburbs, until it entered the counties and the more affluent neighborhoods. And that violence goes with it. It's part of the game. And we return to our conversation with Gary McLhinney. We're going to talk about more of his career. We're going to talk about homicides of police officers, and one in particular that we both have a connection to. His book, and so much more. This is the Law Enforcement Today Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Of all the radio stations in the United States, there's only one show like ours, the Law Enforcement Today radio show. And on Facebook, there's only one official page. Do a search on Facebook for Law Enforcement Today radio show. That's Law Enforcement Today radio show on Facebook. When you get there, click like and follow.
Are you wondering where you can find more great podcasts? Head to letradioshow.com, click Be Heard, and discover other fantastic podcasts like this one. Also available on our free app, all at letradioshow.com.
We're returning our conversation with Gary McLhinney on the Law Enforcement Today show. Gary is a retired Baltimore police detective. He is also retired Maryland Transportation Authority police chief. He's co-authored the book Bleeding Blue, 4 Decades Policing the Violent City of Baltimore with co-author Kevin Cowherd. In that book, it's a collection of stories from your experience, but it's also really focusing on the murder of many Baltimore police, isn't it?
It is. For 10 of my years in the Baltimore Police Department, I was president of the police union, the Fraternal Order of Police, and that was a full-time job for me. And I got to know many of our survivors of officers who were killed and work with them on projects that were near and dear to them and us. So, I focus a lot of attention on the book onto those heroes who were killed during my career.
I got to say this. I've been a member of the Baltimore FOP since 1980. I'm still, even though I've been retired 30 plus years, I'm still a member, dues-paying member, and the main reason why is the legal defense of officers. They saved my life when I did nothing wrong, and they do that for many, many others. It's a great organization, and they get unfair press all the time, the news media. They make them sound like, we use the term police union. You just said that. It's not really a union. Yeah. We're not allowed to do a lot of things that a lot of unions can, but it's the only thing we have.
Yeah, I'm a diehard FOP supporter, and I'm still on their board of directors. And I did have the privilege of working for 8 years at the law firm that represented police officers.
They were the best.
Later in my career, and the work they do to save those who are unjustly accused for a variety of reasons, political or otherwise, it's been consistent. I think that firm has probably been representing police officers in Baltimore for well over 45 years.
They've done a great job, and I don't talk about my story because it's not just my story. It's my ex-wife's story. It's my daughter's story. Right. It's my current wife, my mom, my sisters. Those are the same last names as me, so I don't talk about it. The show really is about my guests, and I want to go back to, we know each other. We know of each other. We never worked together that I can recall. It might have been maybe what they called mass raids in projects where they gathered up everything for operations. Right. Other than that, I don't think I ever really stumbled across Gary. But we knew of each other, and we knew that he had a great reputation. And when I heard about your book, Bleeding Blue, 4 Decades Policing the Violent City of Baltimore, I reached out to you. My other co-author is Kevin Cowherd, who's a phenomenal journalist in the Baltimore area. And I reached out to you and said, look, we got to talk. What's this about? And you said it was about the murders of many Baltimore police, and you started mentioning some. And there's many that really impacted me tremendously, but there's one of a young officer named Vincent Adolfo that really, to this day, still bothers me very deeply.
Yeah, it bothers all of us. And, we came on around the same time. So we were, you and I were in our careers as Vince was in his career, right? And I know I was in patrol. Vince was a patrol guy. We were both young. It really hit home to me, newly married. And Vince was doing, the night he was murdered, was doing what we all did and really loved to do. I mean, people talk about getting into police work for service and other things, but, chasing bad guys was what we loved to do. And that's what Vince did that night. The details of that night show what kind of police officer Vince was. And it was reflective of, the thousands of other officers in patrol that were just, out there day in, day out doing their job.
Yeah, they're grinding out calls for service and looking for bad guys in their post. And we had a real post mentality. Look, I didn't want other cops having to handle my post. That meant they had to disregard theirs. I didn't want other cops from other sectors coming to our sector to do it, or other districts. So we would stack calls, but we always had the mentality, and our sergeants drilled into this. Look, make sure your post is clean. Get the bad guys off the street. Know who they are. And a long story short, I had a run-in, I guess is a little more than a year before. And a very quick explanation of the story. I was getting out of my patrol car. I walked into a known drug retail establishment, and a guy opened the door for me who had arrested many times before. And he said to me, that guy walking down the street's got a gun in his shopping bag. And he described the guy, and I saw him. And I walked after him and called for backup. My backup officer came up. We grabbed the guy. Long story short, when this plastic bag hit the hood of our patrol car, back then it was AMC Concords. That's how long ago it was.
Yes, they were.
It was a heavy metallic sound, and we knew right away what that was. And he reached for it. And we grabbed him, secured him, and turned out to be a 357 Magnum. And his name was Flint Gregory Hunt. And he was, if my memory is correct, he was convicted. He had other things he was convicted for. He was supposed to be in prison. He wasn't.
Yeah. Flint Gregory Hunt was, it's an understatement. He was really a bad guy. He was known on the streets of Baltimore as being extremely violent, not wrapped real tight when it comes to people's ability to influence him, to get him to do things. Plus, he did it on his own. He was a street guy, and he was out there for no good and no amount. If he was going to be on the street, he was going to be committing crimes. And quite frankly, his history when he was incarcerated, he was committing crimes inside as well.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the guy who tipped me off about him said he's here to hit somebody, which was slang back then for murder. He was there looking for someone to shoot. And he had a beef with someone on the west side, and he came all the way over. And I believe he even took the bus. It was not uncommon for extremely violent criminals to take mass transit.
Yeah, I mean, and it was unusual because he did have a reputation and a history of being on both sides of town. Yeah, I mean, he was an East Side guy. It was where he laid his head a lot, but he was known to be in the Western District, and quite frankly, he was a hitman because he's got other bodies on him as well besides Vince's.
And we'll talk about that in a moment. And you said something, and God, is like going back in history, and it's not necessarily all pleasant. It's some of it's very emotionally upsetting. I worked narcotics for many years out of the Northwest District, and it was detailed to DEA. And I remember on a drug raid in the southern end of Northwest District, and it was a multi-level building with a fire escape in the back. And somehow or another, me and this guy got in this fire escape, and it was between me. I was between him and the exit. And he was a known hitter. And he had about seven bodies under his belt. And when you got to go up against someone like that, I'm going to tell you right now, just my experience, professionalism, courtesy, nice language, all that stuff goes out the window, and it can quite often become a battle of life and death. And that's what happened. Yeah,
absolutely. Hopefully training kicks in when you go up against a guy like that, but it's a street fight.
It's a street fight. It's ugly. No one likes street fights, even cops. And we had a saying, it's like making sausage. No one wants to see it made in public. This is Law Enforcement Today's show. We're returning our conversation with Gary McLhinney in just a few moments. There's so much more to talk about. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Have you ever wanted to listen to a favorite Law Enforcement Today episode again? Or chat directly with John J. Wiley? Now you can. Download Podopolo for free on either app store and send John J. Wiley a DM right on the app. That's Podopolo, Podopolo.
Has this ever happened to you? You sign up for a free email newsletter, and within hours, you're receiving tons of spam. That won't happen when you subscribe for the free Law Enforcement Today radio show email newsletter. We won't spam you. No more than 2 emails a week. I promise. All subscribers are automatically entered in all future contests. Sign up at letradioshow.com. Scroll down to the sign up area. That's letradioshow.com. Return conversation with Gary McLhinney on the Law Enforcement Today show. Gary is retired Baltimore police detective. He's a brother, served the same time as me. Our careers overlapped. He's also retired Maryland Transportation Authority Chief of Police. The agency protected Port of Baltimore, BWI Marshall Airport, state bridges, tunnels, and toll roads. Co-author of the book, Bleeding Blue, 4 Decades Policing the Violent City of Baltimore, with co-author Kevin Cowherd. Now, this book is a lot about all the officers that were murdered and their stories of what happened, and a little bit of backstories about their family. The one we're talking about in particular, because there's a connection, is the murder of police officer Vincent Adolfo. I explained my part before. Can you tell us what happened, what transpired?
Yeah. On the night of November 18th, 1985, Vince was doing what a lot of us who were relatively new to law enforcement and in patrol, he was doing the meal run for the Eastern District. And the meal run is there's prisoners, there's a cell block at the Eastern District where Vince was assigned. His job was to pick up the meals, and deliver them to the cell block. Meals were all made off site. And he was returning actually from the city jail where they prepared the meals for the Eastern. And Vince was returning to the district from the meal run, saw a car. Back then, we didn't have computers in our cars. We had what was called the hot sheet. And there was a sheet of paper that listed a lot of stolen cars on it. Vince had it pinned to his dashboard like most of us did, with a thumbtack. And, he noticed that the car was stolen, called it in to confirm it, and then proceeded to do what was tactically exactly how we were trained. He followed it. He noticed it was occupied by a couple individuals. He called that into dispatch. He waited for help in order to be able to box in the vehicle. He didn't try to do it by himself, knowing he had multiple folks in the car. And they initiated basically a textbook car stop, so much so that the car that was stolen actually hit one of the police cars during the stop. And this was on the east side of Baltimore where Vince worked. Immediately upon the car stopping, the driver exited the vehicle and ran. As we all try to do, we want to get the driver. He's the priority. Vince took off after the driver while other officers detained the passengers. And there was a gun in the car as well. Vince took off in a foot chase, caught up to the driver in what was called an alley, but is actually kind of a street combination alley. Baltimore City, as you know, is a series of row houses, small streets, nooks and crannies, if you will. And Vince chased the driver of the vehicle down the alley and was able to catch up to him. Again, our training at that time was you would sprawl people onto a wall or a fence that is, kind of like you saw on TV, hands out wide, feet out wide, on the wall. That was the training at the time. It's now different, and we probably should get into that at some point. But Vince did it by textbook. And as he was doing his pat down and getting ready to handcuff an individual who turned out to be named Flint Gregory Hunt, he pushed off the wall, which, as we know, is something that people who are incarcerated quite often practice.
They practice it regularly. It was part of their daily training out in the yard. Yep.
And so... he pushed off the wall, was able to cause Vince to stumble, and he pulled a handgun from his waistband and shot Vince almost point blank in the chest. Vince then staggered back and stumbled and ended up being kind of on all fours, bent over with his back facing Hunt. Hunt then fired another shot, which proved to be the fatal shot into Vince's back, and then made his escape. Responding officers heard the shots, found Vince in the alley, attempted to resuscitate Vince and have him transported to a hospital, where Vince never made it to the operating room and was pronounced dead at Johns Hopkins Hospital.
He was very young at this time. I believe, if memory is correct, he's like 25.
Yeah, Vince was 25 at the time. And then began not only the hunt, if you will, for the perpetrator, but the support that was needed for a obviously devastated family.
Yeah.
And as a young police officer, I heard about this. I was working the midnight shift, and I'll never forget it. I'm sitting out early in the evening, getting ready to go in to the shift, and around dinner time, and a neighbor came over. I lived in the Northeast District of Baltimore at the time. A neighbor came over and asked me if I heard anything. And I said, no, what's up? And they proceeded to tell me, because it was in the early evening that Vince was shot, and I immediately went in and tried to find out what was going on. And as with all the case, when something like this happens, everybody goes to work. You didn't have to be called in for overtime. No. Somebody, in my district, the Northeast border to Eastern. So normally you go in for midnight, maybe 10, 10:30, 11 o'clock, get changed, play some pool, talk to everybody, have a good time, and then get ready to hit the road. But, we went in early. What can we do? We got to start looking for this guy because he was still on the run. So that began that saga. And then,
do you remember, Gary, how long it was for they announced the suspect's name? Because my memory banks, it was a long time ago. When I heard the news, it was upsetting, very upsetting. And then when I heard who the suspect was, it was crushing.
I can only imagine. It was literally that evening that they had a suspect. Because the occupants in the car gave him up really quick. So they had a name. Obviously, they didn't, have any forensics back or anything like that at the time, and didn't have a warrant until shortly, the next day. But they knew who they were looking for, and back then our homicide unit. Man, it was the best in the country.
They were great, yeah.
I mean, those guys were amazing. Rick Requier, Jay Landsman, some of those guys. I mean, they were the best of the best.
We had those guys, and I was talking with Chris Anderson, a retired Birmingham homicide detective, star of Reasonable Doubt, in an interview, and he talked about the old heads, back in the day when we were young police, the old homicide detectives that trained you. Those guys, and I'm saying guys, that means men and women, when they talked, everybody listened. There was no back talk, there was no lip, none of that stuff. They had a way of carrying themselves. They meant business. They knew what they were doing. And if they said someone killed somebody, you could take it to the bank.
Oh, absolutely. And, they didn't have the modern tools that they have now, right? So they weren't tracking people's cell phones and getting all this forensic data. There was no DNA. This had to be good old-fashioned police work, getting witnesses, building a case, getting confessions, getting interviews. I mean, these guys were good.
Old school
and I'm not
policing.
taking anything away from the new guys. But the technology wasn't there.
Oh, man, we could talk about that when we return. It was what we call gumshoe policing. It was talking to people. It was neighborhood canvases. It was finding witnesses. It was doing the stuff that people don't want to do. It's not sexy. It's not fun. It's not cool, but that's where cases are solved. We're talking with Gary McLhinney, retired Baltimore police detective, also retired Maryland Transportation Authority chief of police, and co-author of the book, 4 Decades Policing the Violent City of Baltimore, with co-author Kevin Cowherd. We've got so much more to talk about. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. This portion of the Law Enforcement Today radio show is brought to you in part by Pet Rescue Life Facebook page Everyone's welcome at the Pet Rescue Life Facebook page, where you'll find fun, informative, and enjoyable posts daily. Purebred, mixed breeds, rescues, we love them all. Be sure to like the Pet Rescue Life Facebook page. Return conversation with Gary McLhinney on the Law Enforcement Today show. Gary is retired Baltimore Police Detective. He is also retired Maryland Transportation Authority Police Chief and co-author of the book Bleeding Blue, 4 Decades Policing the Violent City of Baltimore, co-author Kevin Cowherd. We're talking, your book is a lot about the murders of many Baltimore police, and we're talking about the case which touched both of us, Vincent Adolfo. November 1985, he was murdered, and the suspect was Flint Gregory Hunt, who had a connection with, had arrested about a year before with a gun. When we left, we talked about the homicide detective put out who they're looking for, there's warrants, all that stuff, and he had, if I remember correctly, he had taken off, didn't he?
He did. He took off. He originally went to Philadelphia with a 16-year-old girlfriend. They separated in Philadelphia, and he had bought a one-way bus ticket to Santa Monica, California. Fortunately, there was a nationwide manhunt for him, and a woman traveling on a bus out of New York actually recognized him from a flyer that the local police department had been distributing to those bus terminals. Again, no internet, right? Gumshoe police work, police officers handing out flyers at bus stations, looking for people. And she recognized him and called the police, and he was apprehended in Oklahoma as he got off a bus during a break.
And I also remember that he was the second to last, he was convicted. He was the second to last person in the history of Maryland to be executed. Am I correct?
You are correct. He was executed July 2nd of 1997. So literally 12 years after he was arrested, couple trials, couple appeals, re-sentence hearings. It was really an example of, in my view, how the criminal justice system treats victims. I became president of the FOP in 1996 and became good friends with Karen Adolfo, Vince's young widow. They did not have any children. And, through that ordeal, I really saw firsthand how the system treats the victims. And the victims are not only the people that the crime is perpetrated against, but in this case, their family, their loved ones who simply want to see justice.
If my memory's correct, theirs was the stereotypical Hollywood described high school romance. They were romantic when they were kids, and they'd wait till she was older, and they'd been together. That's all they ever knew was each other.
Correct. Karen was 12 years old, and Vince was 16 when they met. Karen wasn't allowed to date until she was 16. And Vince would travel roughly 30 miles to visit Karen daily, whether it was by bus or whether it was on his bicycle, traversing through Baltimore to get to the area in Baltimore County where Karen lived. So they were high school sweethearts even earlier, and Vince had joined the police department after a short career in construction where he got hurt and was looking for something more stable so him and Karen could begin a life and begin a family. And the police department offered that.
One of the things I've always struggled with, Gary, is I tell people that if I saw a widow of an officer, I'd be afraid to talk to them. I'd be afraid of saying the wrong thing. And you helped me with that quite a bit as a prior interview with Kim Martin Diachilla. Her husband, Billy Martin, who used to work for me in Central District of Baltimore, was shot and killed a couple months after transferred. She really helped. She said, you can't make things worse. The worst has already happened. The worst you can do is ignore us or not talk to me. Talk about football. If I want to talk about Billy, I'll talk about Billy. If I don't, I won't. But Karen, I always felt guilty. Hindsight's 20/20. There's nothing I could have done different. But I always felt guilty that if I had done something different, I know logically this doesn't make sense. Vincent still be alive. And I know hindsight's 2020. I know logically, but that doesn't take the emotional aspect of it. And I've always been scared to reach out and try to find Karen.
Yeah, I'm still in touch with Karen today. Karen has built a wonderful life for herself, but clearly she was, I don't even have the words to describe what the devastation occurred to her and her family by losing Vince. They had just been married a month over 2 years prior to Vince being killed. And, Karen and we talk a lot over the years. We talked a lot when I was preparing the book. I would not have done the book if Karen would have said no.
Isn't that amazing? She inspired you, kind of pushed you to move forward?
Yes. I reached out to Karen and said, listen, I got this idea. I want to focus on police officers killed in the line of duty. I want to talk a lot in the book. And, I devote a little over 3 chapters of the book just to Vince because subsequently to Hunt's trials, he was sentenced to death, as you mentioned. And, I vowed to be there for Karen because Karen, and this, victims are not often granted the opportunity to witness the execution of someone that killed their loved one. And we were able to work it out where Karen could be a witness to the execution, and I wasn't going to let her go there alone. So I offered myself up to being a witness to the execution as well, so I could accompany Karen. And we've had a wonderful relationship over the years. She's just a dear, dear friend, and I, really enjoy spending time with her.
Please tell her I said hello, and feel free to reach out.
Certainly will. Absolutely.
And I applaud you, Gary, for doing what you've done, because here's when I originally started this idea for this show, twofold. One of them was, a big part of it was, so many survivors like Karen say their number one fear is that their loved one, a police officer or anybody else, would be forgotten, that no one would tell their stories. And that's a big part of why we do the Law Enforcement Today show. I can applaud you for doing what you did to make sure that their memories kept alive and that their sacrifice is kept alive, because so many great people in Baltimore have paid the ultimate price. And many people, many, many more, have been severely injured and they're in wheelchairs.
No, you're right, and you're right. It is hard. What do you say? The countless times throughout my career I responded to shock trauma. The hospital that treats our officers to hold a widow's hands or children's hands as the doctors come in and tell them that their loved one did not survive. It's hard. But I can tell you, those of us that have been in the business of law enforcement, we say never forget, and we don't. We don't. And there's great organizations out there that help these family members that are left behind, and we got to support those. And quite frankly, a portion of my book sales are going to 2 organizations. One is the Signal 13 Foundation, which helps Baltimore police officers in financial need, and COPS, Concerns of Police Survivors.
Great organizations. They're phenomenal. I want to talk about your book, Bleeding Blue, 4 Decades Policing the Violent City of Baltimore. Where can people find it? Where can they buy it? Because you said not only is it a great read, but it helps benefit these 2 great organizations.
Yeah, so, I'm really proud of the book. It took a while. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any online book outlet. And like I said, proceeds are going to Concerns of Police Survivors and Signal 13 Foundation, 2 organizations that I've supported for years. And, writing a book is hard, and it puts you out there.
You said earlier, we will never forget, and I'll be honest with you, there's times I wish I could, and there are times that memories come up, and they're uninvited. They're not welcome, but they're still there.
Yeah, and they're always going to be there. I devote a section of the book with photographs of every officer that was killed during my career, whether it was in the Baltimore Police Department or as chief of police. I lost 3 officers in the line of duty, and eulogized each all three of those and are still close with their families. And I think that's the connection that makes it, I want to say, bearable. Because you're right, we never forget, and that can be good and bad.
And the mission continues on. Yeah, I got to cut you off because we're almost out of time. Is there a place where people can find out more about you or contact you online?
They can. They can reach me online at Gary@McLhinneyConsulting.com. And I'd really appreciate it if anybody has any questions, wants to reach out, wants to talk to some of our family members, or be in touch with law enforcement in Baltimore. Please let me know. The publisher is Apprentice House Press, great organization based out of Loyola University here in Baltimore, and it was a great project. You said Kevin Coward's a Baltimore guy.
He was
great to work. He was great to work with.
I'm going to have to cut you off. Gary, thanks so much for being a guest on the show. We will definitely have to have you back in the future.
Great. Thank you so much.
I'd like to thank our guests so much for coming on the Law Enforcement Today radio show. The Law Enforcement Today radio show is a nationally syndicated radio show broadcast on numerous stations once a week and growing. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, please do me a big favor. Tell a friend. And if you're able, leave an honest review and or rating. I'll be back in just a couple days with a brand new episode of the Law Enforcement Today radio show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.